pleasure to have you here, Megan. I am waiting forward to hear about your presentation. You should be able to share.
Okay, well, thank you. Oh, one moment. Let me just move. I can just see that. Okay, perfect. So thank you everybody for attending this session, and thank you to Biotech Atelier for the invite to discuss this very important topic as well. So today I'm going to be speaking about digital health and health inequalities and health inequities in a keynote called No Patients Left Behind. So it's a very patient-centric approach. So we're all at this event, either in this session or these last 3 days, to discuss the impact and progress that can be made with digital health. Progress that can deliver better treatments, early diagnoses, and also unburden a very overwhelmed healthcare system. But what would you say? Oh, this cannot switch. Oh, there we are. But what would you say if I told you that for digital health tools, there is a significant barrier to use in 1 in 3 patients? So to put that in a different way, that's only 66% of patients who are able to use digital health tools. It's sad, it's unfair, but it's not particularly surprising because progress historically favors the privileged. I mean, the traditional healthcare pathway has shown this for years. It's no different, and absolutely in no way is it perfect. Let's just get that out the way right here. But I believe we do have the duty to ensure that as we continue to progress the industry of digital health, and it is one with so much potential for good, that we don't fall into the same kind of traps, and so that no patient gets left behind. Now here I would usually do a small introduction to myself, but I think Teddy did a perfect example there. So just to recap, I'm Megan Simpson. I work at a digital therapeutics company right now, Tired of Cancer. I have an education in health sciences, and I'm an ex-full-time cancer carer. And I'm hoping that today I can equip you with some knowledge to create, promote, regulate, invest in digital healthcare tools that can really bridge the gap and improve the existing healthcare inequality and inequity problem and not exacerbate it. But first, what do we mean when we talk about health equality and health equity? Now, you might be familiar with this diagram. It's quite a famous one, but I think that's because it's so useful and so insightful. So when we talk about equality, specifically health equality, what we mean is that everybody has the same access to everything, shown here by these small boxes. But what you'll note is that the little one on the right still can't see over the fence. So even though they're given the same access and the same tools as everybody else, they can't quite see over that fence. Equity, on the other hand, is looking at the person as an individual and saying, what tools can I provide for you to help you get to where you need to be? So here, that's 2 boxes for the little one and no boxes for the person on the left, but they can still all see over the fence. Now, what we're experiencing in the healthcare world today, digital and traditional, is not health equality and it's not health equity. In fact, it's far from it. But why? And more importantly, who isn't getting this equal and equitable care? Well, we are very well aware that there are groups of people in society who, completely irrespective of their innate worth and their innate value, they occupy unequal positions. And this really, unfortunately, leads to an observable reduction in their health outcomes. Now, this unequal position, it can be related to many factors. So, for example, their age, their gender, their ethnicity, their race, whereabouts it is in the world that they live, their housing situation, for example. There are so many more things that put people in this unequal or unequitable position. And unfortunately, the more of those characteristics people have, the worse the problem becomes for them, the more at risk they become of these health inequalities. So these people are already experiencing health inequalities. But then what's unfortunate is that people who are at that risk are also at a much higher risk of digital exclusion. So in a world where health and digital are quite fantastically becoming more and more intertwined every day, it's not actually that fantastic for everybody because it's not a particularly promising picture for those people who are already at the risk of lower health outcomes. Now, people here, you might be lucky enough to think, hey, I don't know anybody in this situation. 3 out of 3 of the people that I know have access to digital health. But it's not really a small problem, and it's not just a problem left for example, developing countries. I'm going to tell a little story now, and it starts basically where I started. So this is my hometown here that you can see on the map. It's called Bradford. It's a city in the north of England. And like many cities in the north of England, it was once a very flourishing industrial site that's now kind of fallen into wreck and ruin a little bit. And that first kind of point, you can see that map pin on the right, that's really in the heart of Bradford Centre. And the one that you can see on the left at the top, that's in a rural suburb of Bradford. But the distance between those 2 pins is only 10 miles. So maybe it's easy for you, it's 16 kilometers. Not very far at all. But in those 10 miles, there is a difference in the healthy life expectancy of 20 years. 20 years, what a stark difference in just 10 miles. And if you look at it from an actual overall life expectancy, so at what age people are expected they will die, there is a 10-year difference in 10 miles. So for every mile outside of Bradford that you live, you're likely to die a year early. Now that is absolutely mad. That is no distance at all, and such a difference in your health outcomes. And why is that? Well, it goes back to the characteristics that I mentioned before. So people in Bradford are much more likely to be ethnically diverse, from different races, to not have English as their first language. There's a lot of poverty, and there's also a lot of homelessness in the centre of Bradford. But as with all good stories, there are some heroes in this story as well, and I will talk about them a little bit later. But what I really want to mention here is that Bradford, this is not particularly unique. However, the standard in which digital health cannot be delivered is quite drastic. So if we look, okay, those people have bad health outcomes. I want to also bring in the statistic that 12% of people in Bradford don't have access to the internet. So if you put a figure to that, that's 48,000 people who cannot use the digital health tools that are there to improve their health outcomes. So that's 48,000 people who are being left behind. This is not good for us because, of course, we don't want people left behind. But it's also not great if you want to be looking at it from a commercial perspective, because that's 48,000 people who cannot be delivered the digital health. So they can't use your telemedicine, they can't use your digital therapeutic. Whichever aspect drives you, it's not a good picture. But there is some good news, which is that people are trying to bridge that gap. As I mentioned, there are some heroes in this story. And we can all do the same as well, no matter from which aspect we're looking in on digital health and digital therapeutics. And we all have a role that we can play. So I'm hoping by this point, and the fact that you'd even attended this session at the first place, that you're on board with the idea that patients do deserve to get the healthcare that they need. They do deserve to have access to healthcare, digital or traditional. And if that isn't a driver for you, like I said, the commercials behind this are also really very much a driver. So currently 1 in 3 people are not being able to use the tools, which is what your SAM has been depleted by a third. We also have the fact that just by health inequalities reducing productivity, in England alone, that's around 31 billion to 33 billion impact on the government itself. So whichever perspective you're looking at this from, I'd like to think about what elements you can do from what will follow that fit in with your environment, that fit in with your scenario to help bridge this gap, whatever your driver might be. Now, through the readings that I've done, through the people that I've spoken to, I've kind of divided what we can do into 3 separate options: access, literacy, and being mindful of secondary impacts. I'm going to explore all of these a little bit more, really looking at what is the problem in each of these situations and some examples of how we can solve it. So first, access. It sounds pretty self-explanatory, but there are more aspects to access than we might realize. First, for someone to even get in touch with a digital tool, be it an e-consultation tool, be it a digital therapeutic, you often have to have some kind of smart device. It could be a phone, a tablet, a computer, and even more often, it has to be connected to the internet. But not everybody has smartphones, and not everybody has access to the internet. For a lot of people working in this field of digital health and digital therapeutics, the US is a very big market. However, 15% of US adults don't have a smartphone. And when you look at the people on Medicare, so that is the government-supported healthcare system, 41% of them don't have access to a smartphone. I think that's very significant, and it can be quite surprising for some people. But access isn't all that. Access doesn't just mean can they physically get the product. It means do they also have an environment in which they can use the product? A really key message here is that a safe space is not a given for everyone, especially those people at risk of health inequalities. They might not have a home. They might not have a room to themselves. They might be living in a room with many people. And also, it's other groups of society based on different characteristics that don't always have a safe space. So, for example, imagine you're a member of the LGBTQIA community. You're not openly out to your family. You don't feel like your home is a safe space in which you can have these conversations, and your mental health is suffering. We know that there is unfortunately a higher risk of mental health issues in that community than in the general population. It can be that you don't feel safe to be discussing this over an e-consultation with your doctor from your home. But it might also be that you don't have somewhere else that you can discuss it, and you cannot get a face-to-face meeting with the doctor. That's also a matter of access. And finally, an element of access which is often overlooked is the healthcare professionals. So for somebody to get a digital tool, a digital therapeutic, it often has to be endorsed or go through the pathway through a healthcare professional, be it a doctor, a patient advocacy group, for example. And doctors and nurses and everybody, they're humans. They can be biased. I actually heard a story from a friend of mine also in this industry, where they had a great product, they had the evidence that it's working really well, but then they were like, they're not getting any users. Nobody's using it. And it turns out when they spoke to the doctors that because this product was for older people, the doctors were saying, oh yeah, I didn't recommend it. They were over 60. They probably don't have a smartphone. Oh, they probably don't know how to use the tablet. Oh, no, we didn't even bother asking them because they're old. It probably won't be useful to them. Not considering the fact that a lot of old people these days are using FaceTime, they're on Candy Crush, they're on Facebook, whatever it might be. Older generation are very much more familiar with smartphones than a lot of us think. But that biased perspective of the healthcare professionals was really having an impact on actually getting the product into the patient's hands. But there are things that we can do about this. So I want to talk about a few remedies, maybe to give you some ideas and trigger some thoughts in your own head as well. In terms of access to a smart device, I came across this company, Hublet, at HIMSS in the beginning of summer, and I absolutely think their product is fantastic. It's a loanable smart device, so that if, for example, someone needs to use a digital therapeutic, which comes on a tablet or a smartphone, they can loan out the device from their hospital, from their community centre, use the product back at home, and then bring it in when they're finished. I think this is a great way and a very simple way to get smartphones and tablets into the hands of people who don't have one, meaning they can still get their digital health benefits. In terms of a situation of a person who doesn't have a safe space to take their e-consultations, to do their mindfulness exercises, etc., we really need to ensure that they are signposted somehow back to the traditional healthcare pathway. And I'll discuss this a little bit later. And then finally, healthcare professionals, they're very educated people and they love to be educated. So you see it now that there are more universities that are including digital health within their modules, teaching people when they're becoming doctors. But it's also from our experience working at Tide of Cancer that there are doctors who are real advocates. They want to learn, they just don't know the right language, they don't know the right way to speak about digital health with patients, and they themselves are lacking a bit of confidence. So providing education specific to healthcare professionals, whether you're a pharma company, whether you're a regulatory body, and the writing and the way that digital health is written about is a bit confusing, or whether you are a digital health manufacturer, providing education to the healthcare professionals can really help overcome that hurdle. Now I'm going to move to the issue of literacy. Now, I think we all know, in our minds what literacy means, but there are some complex shades to literacy when it comes to digital health. The first of which is whether it's in an understandable language. And what I mean by this is, for example, if you understand English, it's in English. If you understand Spanish, it's in Spanish. And this is very, very important when it comes to understanding and making the most of digital health tools. I want to tell another story here, and this one's a bit sad, but please bear with me. In New York, in the early days of the COVID pandemic, there was telehealth situations set up because, of course, as we all know, people were being asked to stay away from the hospitals. And a study was conducted which observed 40,000 patient encounters with a doctor. So be it over telehealth, be it in a doctor's office, be it in the emergency room. And what they found was that certain people weren't using the telehealth, and certain people were turning up in much higher numbers in the emergency room. Now, I'm sure we can all remember going to a hospital at the early stages of the COVID pandemic. It was not a safe place to be. You're putting your life at risk, you're putting the life of your families at risk, but you're also burdening that healthcare system even more. And certain groups were even 4.3 times more likely, so 4 times more likely to turn up in this dangerous place, the emergency room, than others. 4 times less likely to use the telehealth, and instead bring that risk by coming to the hospital. So just think to yourself for a second. What do you think linked these people? What shared characteristics do these people have? The answer is that they were Black or Hispanic, they were old, and significantly, they had a native language that was not English. In fact, they found that only a quarter of people who are more comfortable in a language other than English were using the telehealth system. So by not having the telehealth system in a language that they understood, people were having to put their lives at risk. Language really matters. And it's not just about that physical language something's in, whether it's English, Spanish, Dutch, German. It's also about whether it's comprehensible. So if you're on this call, if you're in this field, it's very likely that you have an education, that you're a highly educated person. But not everybody is. And when you're discussing medical situations that are often quite complex, it's really important that people truly understand what is going on. The comprehensible level of language is often lower than we might anticipate it to be. And the final part about literacy is digital literacy. So even if someone has their smartphone, they have their tablet, they have their telehealth tool on there, still a lot of people are not digitally literate. And if we actually look in the US, again, we'll stay in the US, that's 16% of adults who are not digitally literate. Now, there are many ways to overcome these issues, but a big one that I want to hark on is patient involvement. So patient involvement in co-creation, in ideation, in making sure that the content is understandable by them, and really getting a truly diverse sample of what your patient population will be. Understanding what languages they speak at home as well as in the healthcare practice. Really getting those patients involved truly can help build the best possible fit for the patient. And now, as I teased a little bit earlier in the story, the heroes from Bradford who are helping to improve the health inequalities there, we have Bevan here. They're an inclusive health and well-being group. And in Bradford itself, because of all that diversity that was leading to all those bad health outcomes because nobody could access the healthcare, you can see at the bottom right here, all their digital tools are available in all of these languages, with the goal that everybody can understand what's going on in their healthcare system and nobody gets left behind. Now, sticking on the language side of things, the comprehensibility of language can also be measured. So you actually might be familiar, some of you, with the WCAG standards. So they're often used for accessibility of websites, accessibility of apps, for example. But what they also have as part of that component is that all the language used is below kind of a secondary school level. So it's understandable by 11, 12-year-olds. And this is something you can actually just pay for a test to be run. So if you're working with a digital tool that has a website, that has an app, you can just go straight ahead and get them to review this and see if your content is readable by people who need to understand it. And with digital literacy, as you can see here at the bottom left, there are many foundations that are working on this, thankfully. A great one here in the US, National Digital Inclusion Alliance, but there's also some great ones, for example, in the UK, the Good Things Foundation. And then the final element of those three, so we've had access, we've looked at literacy, now the secondary impacts. This one is a bit smaller, but still important, and it's a bit more difficult to understand. What this means is, if someone cannot access or understand the digital tool, we have to make sure that there are no secondary impacts. So they're not slipping through the gaps of the healthcare system. They're not becoming demoralized. Because we have to remember, as much as we are in this world and we think digital health can help everybody and anybody, it was not created to replace traditional healthcare. It was really created to enhance it. And unfortunately, it just won't do that enhancing for every single person. So this is just a call for, is there a way in which we can also make sure that people who digital health just doesn't work for, be it because they can't read it, because they can't access it, that there is a way to maintain their treatment option and get them back signposted onto the traditional healthcare path. One big thing that I want to mention here, especially coming from someone who's working in a digital health manufacturer, so we kind of have a bit more perspective on this, is that all the things that I've mentioned here, they cost money, let's be honest. If you want to have a service where you can loan out smartphones, it's going to cost money. If you want to have a check to see if your website is legible, it's going to cost money. But I really implore you to, if you have any impact on the finance side of things at your company, to put that money aside. To help the patients that we want to help, we have to be commercially successful. That's absolutely clear. But to have real commercial success, helping all the possible people that we want to help, we have to help patients the right way. And remember, there's that 1 in 3 untapped market. So by helping these people, there is the potential to also get a third more customers involved as well. So yes, not something that's always brought up in these conversations about patient advocacy and making the best of the patients, but something that I think it is realistic to have to mention as well. Now, I've spoken a lot about theoreticals, but I want to talk now about someone who is doing this really well, a shining example. And this information only came out, I think, literally 2 days ago at DTX East. And everybody that knows that I'm interested in this was sending me links. Oh, Megan, did you see this? Did you? I unfortunately was not there. So I'm hearing this all secondhand. If there's anybody here watching a recording who has more information about this, I would love to hear it. But it's based around Atelier. So Atelier creates a digital tool. It's a digital therapeutic that's available on prescription in the US called Endeavor RX. And they announced recently that they've created an equitable initiative, monitoring the race, the gender, and the income status, and the ethnicity, I believe, of the children that are using this app. Now, they aim for children with ADHD, and they want to ensure that the people using this app are not particularly more white or particularly more wealthy than the average population of children with ADHD. There have been some really exciting findings from this, one of which I think is that it makes a real big difference to the patient equity, the balance of equity, whether it's on an Android or an Apple device, something I would never have expected, but I would love to hear more about. But the one thing that really, really impressed me here is that they're starting this whole process, this whole equitability initiative, really early on in the product lifestyle. So there's not tens and tens and thousands of people using this already. They're starting early on. so that, as I mentioned at the start, as we progress, we're actively reducing those health inequalities and not exacerbate them. I think this is a shining example. But we're coming to the end now. And I would like to leave with a bit of a call to action, I should say. Because I think it's very easy to come to these speeches, to come to these talks and think, oh yeah, that's great. Okay, yeah, completely agree, completely agree. And then you go get a coffee, and then you go check your emails, and then you forget every single thing that I said. And I'm only saying this because I am guilty of this more times than I am happy to admit. But the issue with digital health inequalities and inequities is not going to solve itself. And in fact, if we don't do anything, it's very likely that the problem is going to get worse. So we have two options. We can accept that, which personally I cannot, or we can act on it. So in the very butchered words, manipulated words, shall we say, of Edmund Burke, all that is necessary for the triumph of health inequity is that good people do nothing. So here is my plea to you. Please do not do nothing. In fact, please take a screenshot of this or a photograph. I've got some homework for you, and I would be really, really happy if you would manage to do this. Number one is to write something down from this session that you can read upon later. Maybe something that triggered something in your mind or something that you're interested in. The second point is to write down an idea that you could implement in your work to lessen the health equity gap. And the third, and perhaps the most important, is to discuss the matter of health inequity or inequality with a colleague. So I would be really excited to hear how you get on with that. You can see my LinkedIn here. Feel free to add me and let me know how it goes. But I just want to finish with, before you go off with the rest of your day, I would just like you to remember that every patient matters. Truly, every single patient. And there is no patient that should be left behind. So thank you for that. I have a few minutes left, I think. If we want to take some questions, I'll stop sharing my screen somehow.
Thank you so much, Megan. Yes, we've changed it for you. This was truly inspirational and I think so important to emphasize on, since we've been talking about digital health opportunities and all the therapeutics that we saw in the first flow, and then all of our keynotes before that in the different flows. But it is really important to understand that they should be available, yes, for everyone, but sometimes for some countries, everyone doesn't really include everyone, and they often forget about our small communities that matter so much. We do have time for one question only because we've gone a bit over time, but I think it's a more practical one. It says, how can we practically overcome the poor communication that comes with digital environments?
The poor communication in what term? Do you have more context?
That's all it says, but I guess what I understand from it is even, sometimes in our normal lives, we don't really engage with our phones or tablets. And especially, I guess, after COVID, everyone wants to be face to face. So sometimes it gets a bit difficult to actually connect over digital world and in the digital environment. And there's also, I guess, poor adherence sometimes when we use digital tools and digital therapeutics. So I guess, how can we practically overcome those problems in order to give this access and opportunities to everyone?
Super. Well, yeah, I think you touched on some very important things there. And I think it goes a little bit back to what I was discussing before about having the patients involved in the co-creation and the co-design. I think assuming that you know what will keep a patient engaged, assuming that you know what will make it easier for a patient is never going to be the right answer. For example, with the e-consultation tools, so that people are no longer having the face-to-face meetings with the doctors, but maybe they're having it online. If there are just so many hurdles to getting on there, so you need to have a separate password every time, you need to log in, and then you click this tab, and then you can't remember which button it was, and then, there's all these hurdles. The more hurdles there are, the much less likely people are to be engaged with it and to want to return to it. So I think design of the digital tool comes into play a lot here. And there is also this key feeling that a patient has. It's kind of hard to put into words, but that this was made for me. This benefits me. This truly helps me. Because you have to remember, whilst this is a facilitative tool, for example, telehealth, the real benefiter is the patient. We have to put them at the front. So I think co-creating with the patient is not the whole answer to this. There's much more I could go into, especially around the adherence and the engagement of a patient. But I think in the short term, making sure that they feel this is for me, this is to help me, and I am being helped and benefiting from this through co-design, I think is very important.
Yes, thank you so much. I think it answered it perfectly. Again, thank you for participating and contributing to our program. It was really interesting and really important, in my opinion.